This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, coming to you from the podcast layer. I am joined by a fellow patriot, somebody that was lucky enough to get to spend some time in the White House, Evan Travino.
Hey, Eric, thanks for having me again.
And everybody out there, remember, this is the 250th year, the celebration of the founding of this country. You know, we're only one generation away from losing our freedom. So we need to become informed. We need to know our rights so we can exercise our rights, so we can demand our rights, because government tends to forget them. One of the ways they forget them is they spend your money and they think they shouldn't have any accountability. So we're going to be talking a bit about DOGE, some current events. I think we're just going to have a good time today.
Absolutely, looking forward to it.
Right now, there's all this information coming out. You know, Minnesota is absolutely, corrupt to the core would be fair.
Absolutely, yeah.
With waste and abuse. And I would contend that you ain't seen nothing yet compared to what we will discover in California. Recently, Nick Shirley exposed a household, just a little family home that had 108 voters. You think there's any problem there?
Goodness gracious. If you couldn't see a problem with that, you'd either be blind or a Democrat.
I think that sums it up just perfectly.
Tackling on, Nick Shirley really started the independent journal of the current gen right now. Before that was James O'Keefe kind of doing the underground, but then he went corporate. He has his own company. Nick Shirley's still doing this on his phone. A friend of mine, Brock Miller, he actually did the video at another daycare that was in Ohio, and the lady looked like a hot dog, and I felt like I was the first person to point this out because he sent it to our group chat. I was like, she looks like a hot dog. And then when it went viral, everyone started photoshopping her as a hot dog.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, but similar circumstance, fictitious daycare center in Ohio, Columbus to be exact.
Well, I'm sure that's not happening in California.
Oh.
Leadership starts from the top in theory. But with Gavin Newsom, he's twice said, no, you can't audit. You can't audit the bullet train. You can't audit homelessness. You can't audit government. He's literally vetoed those types of things. So if the person in charge doesn't want accountability, what do we do?
It's a very good question. I think it really goes back to the core of this conversation. We got to do an audit. We got to do an actual review, and we got to force it. If we allow the people that are committing fraud to say they don't want to look into it, it never will be looked into. It's something that is going to have to be pushed referendum style. And that's one of the few mechanisms in California that, you could get cut by, or you could do some cutting with.
Well, I sure hope so, because there are now various points of people taking the lead on, in effect, doging California. So Reform California, Carl DeMaio, he's got a reform arm, and they're trying to expose waste, fraud, and abuse. And there's lots of different ways to look at this problem. And then you've got Steve Hilton with his hotline. And then very associated with Steve Hilton, you've got CalDoge, which is a private group that they're even working with Nick Shirley. Mm-hmm. Like, they featured a bunch of his stuff. That's run by Jenny Ray LaRue. I frankly wish that Chad Bianco had somebody that was kind of in this fight too. This isn't so much a criticism. This is a Chad, we desperately need this, and you should be talking about this one just like Steve Hilton is. It's not that I'm discounting all of the other governor candidates. It's that if you're not going anywhere in the polls, it's hard to take you seriously. And we don't have a Republican, a third Republican that's above 5%. And you only see those others just occasionally as high as 5%. I really like some of them. I think that we have a great bench there, but if they're not breaking through in the polls and they're not raising money in a state with 40 million people, they're not going to be elected.
No, I totally agree. One thing I would say is that, at least in my personal opinion as a fly on the wall, I feel like Chad has really centered himself around trying to be a law and order candidate specifically with street crime, right? Bringing back that sensibility. However, Steve Hilton has really hit it on the head where being a law and order candidate isn't just about the crime in your streets. It's about the crime in your city hall. It's about the crime in your government buildings and where the money's going. That white collar crime is what I believe it's called.
Well, if all of this money is tied up or used up in white collar crime, then there's not the money for the enforcement against petty crime.
Mm-hmm.
It also just creates a culture of corruption.
Yeah, to circle back to what my expectations are with it, I would say that I have a bit more hope for this than past movements in the past, rather, to say it correctly. Because you look at Prop 36, right?
Mm-hmm.
Passed, overwhelmingly passed, unfunded, abandoned, virtually forgotten in 2026.
It was about 70% past it, if I remember right.
Yeah, and in California, you get 70% of anything. I mean,
mm-hmm. Especially anything that would be perceived as not woke, not left.
Mm-hmm.
Like a common sense thing.
Yeah, I think people in like the Bay Area especially got tired of seeing the one CVS for 3 miles get ransacked.
Well, they also got sick of having to get help to get out a bottle of shampoo.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, are you kidding me? What world are we living in?
Right. Yeah, and explaining that to some of my friends that live out of state has been really fun, because it's almost like dystopian. Like, what do you mean that the soap, and not the good soap, the soap you pick up like at what is essentially a nicer liquor store,
right?
You gotta buzz it.
It's like $3.
Yeah.
Or $4, $5 maybe.
Yeah, but I think at a certain point, it's like these people are not just criminals trying to make a buck. There's also a kleptomaniac appeal to it as well. People that steal have perpetually made that their lifestyle. They don't pay for things, and it's not an expectation of them to do so in California.
Right. It's a thrill for them to steal. A lot of the people that are kleptomaniacs, they don't need the money.
Mm-hmm.
It's the thrill of being able to get it for free.
Yeah.
The problem is, folks, nothing's actually free. Somebody always pays. It's almost as if the idea of socialism has permeated the entire culture of California, and that, well, somebody else should pay.
No, without a doubt. And what's even worse is when you enact a system like that, where you take $5,000 from one person and promise 5 people $1,000, you lost 1 voter and you gained 5. It's something that only affects us in the long run when the system inevitably collapses. And that's been a big fear of mine, especially with this idea being floated of a wealth tax. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of capital flight that leaves from California, and that is a big concern of mine. If anyone watching is familiar with the Laffer curve, or isn't familiar with the Laffer curve, I could let you know. So if you tax people at 0%, you'll get $0 in tax revenue.
Right.
If you tax everyone at 100%, you will also get $0 in tax revenue, because no one would work, everyone would leave, or they just would stay at home because there's no point to working. So there's a happy medium, and that's always been the debate of where that medium lies. And to most economists that aren't ideologically captured, I would say that in California, we definitely tax too much. And you see that in this capital flight. Billionaires leave, and after they leave, their businesses follow, typically within 3 years.
Mm-hmm. Well, we just had a major one leave.
Mm-hmm.
Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah.
That reduced the billionaires' money by half. One guy leaving by half. Now who they're going to tax? Well, why do you think they're trying to have a mileage tax?
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to find every other hidden way where they don't actually have to vote on it, but some government organization, some department will make the choice, because up in Sacramento, they don't want to make hard choices. They want to hide everything.
Yeah, it just never stops with California. It's really unfortunate.
But I do believe it could. I think we could see a lot of common sense this cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Whether we get hard red, I don't think so. But we could get common sense from a lot of people.
Yeah, if you told me 2 years ago that two Republicans would be leading the primary system in California for the governor, I would say, you know what? I like this guy. I think he has a few screws loose, but it's a pretty nice thing to imagine. But now we're here. Right. And Lord willing, we may have an election with two Republicans to choose from after primary.
Right. It's still early, and we'll still have, but it is possible.
Yeah. Not that any liberals are watching the show right now, but like the expedient thing to do for them, just analyzing their playbook, if two of their like second and third runners were to drop, that would secure them, but they're not going to, because anyone running for government, there's a certain level of ego to it, a certain level of pride that refuses, despite the overall good that it would do for their movement.
I can think of multiple people. I was very pleased that David Serpa, I actually liked him as a governor candidate, but he was going nowhere. And he recently said, no, I'm now running for, I think it's lieutenant governor. Sorry, David, if I got that wrong. But thank you to him for going, well, this isn't working. We have too many candidates. Where can I serve?
Yeah, and that's the sort of service you love to see. You don't want people that are in it just for the status or to do it. But when you have someone that says, I genuinely want to serve the community, and maybe that may not look how I initially envisioned it.
Well, but we don't decide, God does.
Absolutely. I think wanting to serve and being able to identify where you can serve best is the best combo.
Well, California has all kinds of problems with our voting system. It does not, because it's too inaccurate, it does not actually meet federal law. Meaning, too many ballots are kicked out per, I think it's 100,000. Yet we have a vote by mail system, which is easy to manipulate. I mentioned earlier, 108 households at one house. And it wasn't a giant mansion with 108 rooms. It was just a normal house. Another one that kind of scared me that came out recently. Last year, 450,000 people that were called in for jury duty were deemed ineligible for one key reason. They weren't citizens. Now, we've got a DMV, and if English is your second language, maybe you screwed up. I can't say every one of those people actually voted, but every one of those people is definitely registered. Some of them would be like, oh no, but because they're here illegally, they don't know how to back it up. So I'm not saying it's necessarily 450,000, but let's say it's 100,000. That's way too many by itself right there.
Yeah. That moves the needle in so many ways for so many races, especially after this redistricting that happened, or is poised to happen, rather. I think it's more important now than ever for people to make their vote count. Getting out and voting is half the battle. It's also preventing the bad votes. Like this idea of defense that wasn't initially envisioned with elections. When people came up with elections, they weren't focused on keeping more people out than getting people in, rather. I think this is a relatively new piece to elections, fighting back fraudulent votes. At least en masse, right? There's always been a little bit of fraud, corruption, as long as humanity.
On both sides.
Yeah.
On every side you can think of, not just the two parties. I'm sure there's some at a smaller level because they don't get a lot of votes with all of those third parties. It is scary to me that a Democrat, Jimmy Carter, was on a presidential commission, I believe it was during the Clinton administration, on what do we do about our voting system and where is it vulnerable. And Jimmy Carter, he was a Democrat, right?
Yes. He was also a peanut farmer.
Kind of looked like a peanut, too. But at least he was a fairly honest man. I thought a pretty incompetent president, but pretty honest man. And he's like, no voter ID is a huge vulnerability. Universal mail-in balloting. In other words, if you mail it in, there's too many things that could go wrong along the way. And he wasn't even necessarily talking because Universal was not around then. By universal, I mean everybody that's registered to vote in California gets mailed a ballot, whether you're alive, whether you're dead, whether you're still here, whether you're some poor woman's dog down in Southern California that managed to vote twice.
Right.
And she did that to illustrate that the system is completely broken.
To me, the thing that seems the most damning is that in some capacities, other branches of the government seem to know who's who, yet we can't get these administrations and departments to talk to one another. If there was even just an overlay of one list to another and weeding out the excess between these lists, that in and of itself, I feel like would make a huge difference. But it
would, but in California, we've got, to put it in perspective, Texas has just under 100 government organizations that run under the state government. New York has 100. California has 244 different departments. Okay, really easy to get lost in the weeds when every time you turn around, they can pass the buck and go, oh no, it's that organization. Now, I know this isn't just about voter ID in this case, or whether you're a legal or illegal voter, but when you can pass the buck that many times in that many ways, fraud's easy.
Oh, yeah. It just gets lost in the weeds of things. So, covering brain fart.
I've had days like that.
Forgive me, folks. I'm a disabled veteran. I'm blaming it on the head injury.
Something else that worries me about what we're doing with voting. So you mentioned two different agencies. Think of it as you've got a county agency that is responsible for the voter rolls, and then you've got Shirley Weber, who is doing everything she can to make sure that everybody could vote, but doesn't care whether they prove anything and says, well, there's no fraud because they'd have to commit a crime to vote.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I spent quite a number of years, I'm not a very successful criminal, but I spent quite a number of years as a volunteer at a boys' home, and almost every one of those boys had a criminal past. I would bet, because I spent a lot of time there, if I asked them, just because it's against the law, would that have stopped you? And I would say, the criminals I've known that are adults, just because it's against the law, would that have stopped you? We have incidences of criminals paying for ballots. Well, it's cheaper to buy a ballot for $100 than it is to go out and run a campaign. What if you knew it was going to be close and you needed 400? Well, at $100 a piece, what is that? $4,000? But to run ads, to build signs, would be a lot more than $4,000.
Yeah.
There's an incentive to cheat.
There's also less promise with it too, right? Trying to do things the right way, trying to win hearts and minds, you have to actually win those hearts and minds. Paying in cash for a ballot to a person that is, and I say this in the most respectful way possible, politically illiterate, who doesn't realize the gravity of the situation in which they've just taken part in. Mm-hmm. You know, let's say you got a single mom of 4, works overtime throughout the week, is trying to just get by like everyone else. She gets a ballot. She doesn't care about politics. She doesn't have time for politics.
Right.
And someone comes by saying, I will give you $100 for this piece of paper you do not care about.
Right. And all they need to do is get her to sign it before they take it. Or, frankly, you could just make something up. So you have these two different organizations, because I started with Shirley Weber and our local register a voter, or in some cases the county clerk, because there's 58 counties, it's not always called the same thing. Sometimes they're a combined position. Well, the local person could remove somebody from the rolls because they moved away, they died. Those are the two main reasons. Mm-hmm. And Shirley Weber could go, oh no, and put them back on. And there's nothing that at the county level they can do about that. Well, if you have, again, at the top of the person responsible for making sure that our elections are fair is corrupt, Yes, Shirley Weber, I think you're at best profoundly wrong and at worst corrupt, in my opinion. What do you do? That's a huge part of California's problems is that there's nobody going, I'm accountable, I take responsibility, and I'm going to fix this. Instead, it's, I didn't do it, it's Trump's fault.
And it seems to be the easy cop-out, and the worst part is so many people will believe you when you say that. Mm-hmm. It all rhymes around this core theme of accountability and just no seeming effort or appetite to review an audit.
Mm-hmm.
And it really goes back to the need for a CalDoge, and it just the feasibility of it. If we're honest, this heavily relies on us winning the governorship.
Yes, or at least the attorney general, because he is somewhat independent of the governor. But even that one would make a huge difference. Secretary of State would also. That's Shirley Weber's position that is in charge of voting. That would make a huge difference because they regulate voting. Mm-hmm. So that any one of those three positions, though governor obviously would be the best one to get, would be exceedingly helpful.
Yeah, it just goes to show, even if we get the law on the books, the last thing I want for CalDoge or any reform effort is to be another Prop 36.
Meaning where it didn't get funded.
Where it doesn't get funded, it doesn't get taken seriously, and to the average person who may have even voted for it, it's just not on their mind anymore. It's become another failed promise of California.
Yeah, but Gavin's running for president, and of course he's done everything right.
See, the thing about running as a Democrat nowadays is you don't even necessarily need to have a great track record. You look at the real winners they put up. Let's look at Joe Biden, ran on not being Trump. Look at Kamala Harris.
And he cared. They run a lot on, not necessarily that I'm going to fix it, but I care about you. It's an emotional appeal. And so it doesn't matter whether their policies work. It's that they cared. Yeah. They're the compassionate ones. They care about this whole list of, frankly, made up first world problems like, I don't know which gender I am. Well, it's pretty simple. There's only two, and we don't have to overthink this, but you've got a bunch of people that are caught up in their emotions and this whole wokeness that ignores meritocracy.
Yeah. And it also helps to have, about 300,000 ballots just kind of show up in the middle of the night. That helps too, But
that's Georgia. That's not a California problem.
Well, at least we don't.
We just don't have the proof yet.
Yeah. But just more to my point that to run on a side that doesn't take facts seriously, that doesn't take situations by how you treat them rather than how you campaign on them, it doesn't really matter too much that this person has a successful track record. You look at Kamala Harris. She was universally disliked amongst Democrats until she became the running girl. As long as you got the face of the movement and you've already assumed that I am the person you're going to vote for, they have their base on gridlock. Now, that's been bleeding over time. You see it amongst Hispanics, some black men, but for the most part, their core audience, their core grouping has not left. They remain in lockstep in a way that I can only envy. Not for the reason that they are, but just having the same people on the same point in such a mass scale.
Well, it's kind of a liberal hive mind, and wokeness also focuses on hierarchy. Mm-hmm. At the top, they coronated the person in this, recently Kamala Harris. Mm-hmm. She didn't get that nomination with votes. She got that nomination without votes.
Yeah.
It was a coronation. The Party of Democracy, the Democrats, decided that they would ignore democracy to save democracy.
You gotta love it.
Yeah, it's just a crazy world. So something else I think that needs a whole lot of light that has to do with DOGE is homelessness. Mm-hmm. And we've gone with a housing first model, in some cases paying as much as $2 million for a home in Southern California to house a homeless person. Doesn't seem like a very good deal to me, because I get that homes are more expensive in LA, but really? And that's one of the successes that Gavin talked about. We got crazy money we have spent on homeless, and he refuses to allow the situation to be audited to figure out where the money went.
Yeah. The last time I heard, what was this, in 2024, the last time they really looked at this, they found that not only did homelessness not get better, it got worse in a lot of regards, despite the insurmountable amount of money that we spent on this issue. What I would say, though, is that the homeless conversation is a conversation that comes with a lot of unfortunate truths, a lot of tough to swallow pills. And if you've had any interactions with people that have experienced chronic homelessness, it's never because they fell on hard times. It's typically the people that lose their job and are temporarily homeless are just that, temporarily unhoused. But homeless has a certain mindset to it, has a certain theme to it that just isn't present in people that are economically challenged at the time. There's lifestyle choices that need to be addressed and addressed in an honest way. Drug addiction, mental illness, which often play as a vicious cycle to one another. And sometimes it's hard to look at someone who's so downtrodden and beaten and saying, you have a problem. It feels like you're stacking on a place that's already about to fall. But in my opinion, the tower's already fallen. The only way you can kind of rebuild it is if you get things stuck in one place. In a lot of situations, that's going to look like a conservatorship. But I think there's a certain fear to the liability of being legally responsible for someone that you already know to be incredulous.
That's a very nice term for that.
Yeah.
But you realize that it's so bad in California that on Skid Row, the bubonic plague spread by rats, the plague that killed somewhere in the millions of people.
Let's say it's 2/3 of Europe.
Yeah. Now, obviously less population, but every major population center lost at least half of their population to the bubonic plague. Conditions and sanitary conditions are so bad in LA that the bubonic plague is back. We just have modern medicine to fight it, so not as many people are dying.
Yeah, that's scary. The homelessness in LA is such a crazy case study because it's so vastly different than everywhere else. Even in places that you would think would be comparable, like New York, homelessness in LA is just such a unique issue in the sense of how more severe it is, how more pervasive it is. Because on Skid Row, I want to say it's right outside their county jail, and a lot of the people that get released right outside, and many of them stay on Skid Row. And there's also drug dealers and peddlers that will be quick to identify those people. Hey, you're having a pretty rough time. Here's a little something to take the edge off. First one's free. Right. And it begins that cycle again. It's almost a system in of itself.
Well, if you don't start with treatment, and you have to almost, in some cases, I bet you have to actually lock them up to force them to go through treatment. And I realize that it's going to fail a bunch of the time, a large percentage of the time. But if you don't, all you do is perpetuate the same problem. So we got to do something, because we can't have those sanitary conditions. And what about property values? If you've got homeless wandering around everywhere, and we can go to parts of Fresno where that's the case, how do people feel safe? They don't. If they don't feel safe, how do you have a prosperous community? Because businesses don't thrive when there's those types of challenges. They can survive, but they don't thrive. Well, ultimately, I'm a capitalist and I want business to thrive. And I think that whole concept has been ignored in California. It doesn't matter. Oh, well, the rich people will take it. Now, we never did define wealth tax.
Yes. So the idea that's been floated in many cases is that they want to assign a one-time 5% tax on a person's net worth via their assets, their bank accounts, the assumed wealth of that current time.
Including your stuff.
Yes.
If you're rich enough, they would count your stuff. Now, what kind of government control would be needed to go in and audit all of your stuff?
It would require a lot more invasion into the privacy that you somewhat retain right now.
Right.
For one, being able to audit your tax records is already a permission we give the government. We show them that. And with that, you're also going to have to start looking into people's receipts. You're going to have to start looking into people's property. They may even subpoena some of the more rich people to try and go after a higher number. But the scariest thing about this isn't necessarily the privacy in it. It's that what may be worth 200 million today may be worth 10 million in a few months. There's no promise.
If it's Bitcoin, it might very well be.
Yeah, there's no promise in that what's getting taxed is going to retain that value. You could get taxed at an exorbitant rate and the next day just not be as rich, and the government's not going to refund you. In addition to that, a lot of these assets aren't liquid.
Right.
If you're going to tax me $1 million based off of what I have in the bank and what I have in circulation, I'm going to have to sell some of that to pay that tax because I don't have that money.
And then you're not going to have that money because here's the dirty little secret. Poor people, sometimes they'll start a little sole proprietorship type of business, but they don't tend to employ people until they become at least middle class, and preferably upper middle class to pull that off in California because of all the regulations. It's the rich people that go, let's see, if I started a business and I made 15% a year, but I'm going to have to spend $5 million and have employees to do that. But they have the resources, and they're the ones that do that, not the poor people.
Yeah, they're also the people that are the most geographically flexible, and which goes back to my point about capital flight. Here in California, it seems to be a result that no one really wants to acknowledge. And as an aspiring economist myself, I have economists on my IG, but haven't graduated yet. But I feel like I've done enough to claim the title. As an aspiring economist, it's a reality that people just seem to look the other way with when it comes to this. Like, you're going to tax the most richest people with the most resources and expect them not to move to one of the 49 other options, and half of them are significantly better and the other half are at least moderately better with the same viewpoints as you assuming you have living in California. It's insane to me. And every case study from Europe as well, where they say Europe is 20 years ahead or 10 years ahead of California, and that dictates how things are going to go. Look at the capital flight that's happened in France. Look at the capital flight that's happened in the UK. It's insane to me because there's such a proven and empirical track record for it, but it's just something that people look the other way with because sounds nice. Oh, I'm taxing the rich guys, the 1%. That's not me.
I know, but if they really look at it, then facts might get in the way of their feelings.
That's true. It's true.
And that's a real problem. So where's their hope in all this? As an aspiring economist, from that perspective, where's their hope?
Well, the idea is that we're not going to stop spending because then you have to give up social programs, and then you're going to lose votes because a lot of these votes are bought in the sense of the promises that are made to them. So you can't stop spending if you're a Democrat, but you also can't stay in this deficit because eventually the buck ends and then you lose the services anyways and you're broke. So they're going to try.
We've reached that in California.
Yes. So they're going to try and tax their way out of it. But you also can't just tax the everyday person because they notice that. So what do? They attach it to things that seem not as attached to themselves. They tax it through a gas tax where it's like, okay, well, maybe if I drive a little bit less or I ride the bus, or maybe in a few years I could get an EV as one gets used. I'll buy a used one. They try to kind of talk themselves out of it. Like, this isn't affecting me yet. Millionaires and billionaires, oh, you want to tax them? Oh, sure, that doesn't affect me. It doesn't matter that this billionaire actually employs me. There's two different companies, a holding and the one you actually work at. It's about taxing in a way that doesn't seem immediate to the average Californian who isn't politically savvy, and they're just trying to make ends meet. They're hoping they could run these taxes in a way that just aren't immediately apparent. But with that said, it doesn't yield results. Empirically, it doesn't. There has not been a single case in where these exorbitant wealth taxes have been implemented, and if not immediately rolled back, have been heavily modified to where they are a shallow husk of themselves.
That's kind of crazy to think that we keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And that seems to be what California has been at for about 16 years. The Democrats, one party's been in rule for 20, but they've been in absolute ironclad control for 16, meaning they've controlled the governorship and they've controlled both houses with supermajorities, meaning you never need a vote from anybody of any other party to get something through. Well, we have to break that majority if we're going to have hope.
Yeah. You know, a lot of people have this misunderstanding about the California economy. People always say, oh, it's the fifth biggest, largest economy in the world, fifth biggest, largest economy in the world. That's true, but it doesn't just happen on its own. It takes money to make money. And when you start losing this high yield earner and they're bleeding from the state, and 42%, if I'm not mistaken, of all income earned in California is public sector.
It's right in that range.
You start to see how just delicate this fifth largest economy of the world is. It's not robust, and it feels every billionaire that leaves. It feels every government push that's done. If you were to actually wheedle down to the real earners and the real workers of California, we're still a great economy, but we're not fifth largest.
No. Well, we have the highest unemployment, the highest gap between rich and poor, the highest poverty rate of any state. You'd think it'd be Alabama, but no, Alabama's actually doing pretty well.
The South has had a pretty amazing resurgence. Missouri, I believe, or Missouri or Mississippi, one of the M's, right? They used to be 49th in literacy, and now they're 6th.
It's Mississippi.
Mississippi, yeah. And the whole reason is because they stuck with phonetics. Yeah, they stuck with phonetics while every other state tried to reinvent the wheel.
I think they went with phonetics and things like that and traditional learning, and California went with Ebonics.
Ebonics? Yeah, man. Dude.
Because depending on where you look at it, California is somewhere between 40 and 49th now, depending on what lens you look through as far as worst in education. Something crazy happened during the Super Bowl. Now, I didn't watch the game, and I was happy with the cultural shift. I'm not even going to go with the cultural shift because we're talking economics. The winning quarterback.
Oh, I saw this. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
He made this huge bonus, but the way California looks at income, they went, well, it doesn't matter what you made that day. We're going to add that in to whatever you make for your yearly, and you were here for 2 weeks, so we're going to charge you 2 weeks worth of your total salary because you were here in California. And it ended up costing the winning quarterback more than his bonus for winning the Super Bowl. That's insane.
That's like, my stomach dropped when I read that. I was like, oh my goodness. If there was ever a reason to throw a game.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just crazy. And that seems to be the norm for California. That's why we need to vote differently.
Without a doubt. And this election, I do have more hope. We like to say that a lot of times, but I think that the numbers are actually behind us. It's not just wishful thinking. And I think so long as ego remains, and if history has anything to say about it, it will. I don't see a lot of Democrats dropping out of the race. I see them continuing to split the vote. I see Steve Hilton definitely making it across the finish line if I were to make my own prediction. Nothing against Chad. But what I would say is that I think Steve Hilton is a bit more on the pulse with the average voter, as well as the idea that policy needs to shift this. You can't just restore California through a strong arm, tough on crime look. It takes a political touch to policy.
Well, especially because you're going to immediately, if you're elected governor and you're not a Democrat, you're day one, moment one, you're head to head against the legislature.
Yes.
One of the things that I wish, if Chad was smart, he'd be doing this, but he has not chosen to do this. Steve Hilton is running with other people. They have a unified ticket. There's now 4 of them running for statewide office that are all supporting each other, backing each other. Michael Gates for Attorney General. The Democrat woman, Elizabeth Sanchez, maybe, who basically quit as a Democrat, signed up as a Republican, and is now running on his ticket. And there's one more. It's not coming to me. Life has been crazy. I bought a new business, folks, and my head is not completely there. But 4 people. So now you got 5 people, counting Steve Hilton, that are running as a unified unit, all trying to get each other elected. I think this is a great way to go about elections.
Without a doubt, it's a very powerful slate. I'm looking forward to seeing how this election carries out. I think it's going to be really interesting because the last time we had a Republican, what was that, Arnold Schwarzenegger?
I guess we have to admit that he's a Republican. He started out as a Republican, and he ended up as some limp noodle thing.
Oh, yeah. He saw that his friends didn't like him much after that.
Governor.
Well, he definitely was not the Terminator. He got terminated. At least his spine. He had a spinectomy, and it was removed.
Yeah. I'll be back.
Yeah. Well, there's been a lot of culture shifts, and I think that's part of where I find my hope. All of these ethnic groups, they're like, well, wait a minute. Your policies haven't been working, and you're telling me crazy stuff. Wait, I believe in family, and you're telling me that it's okay for kids to have their genitals chopped or added.
Yeah, you know, this is actually something that I warn a lot of conservatives about. Like, your base is both bigger than you think, but it's not bigger in the sense that it is a complete conservative base, right? You have just strayed so far from reality and common sense that you have a lot more people to work with now. You just need to galvanize them. You need people to say, yeah, I do believe there's only 2 genders, and yes, I do go to church, and yeah, we've been doing the same policy for 16 years and it's only gotten worse. Maybe I should switch my vote. That applies to the logical reasoning of common sense folk. But once you get them to the table with that and you get across the finish line, that it isn't permission to go full to the right either.
Right.
Because you will lose them because they're not conservatives, at least not yet.
Well, but they are common sense.
Yes.
And that's why I think Trump appeals to so many of them. The fact that we have a politician that says, I'm going to do this list of things, and then does his darndest to do them.
Yeah.
And what's normal is a politician promises something, and then once they're in, does anything they want. It's like the idea that they were a servant of the people disappeared. 20 seconds, final thoughts.
Final thoughts, like I said, they are moderates. They're willing to work with you. They'll get you over the finish line. But once you're there, you got to keep them in mind. Don't lose the helm and steer it in a way that benefits all people.
Well, I thank you for this time and this conversation.
Thanks for having me.
This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, coming to you from the podcast layer with producer Philville.
Yeah.
Have a good one. It's 250 years. It's time to be patriotic. It's time to take our country back.
God bless. Booyah.
Booyah.